Hello, everyone. I must say, I am enjoying having these conversations with the very intelligent, astute, and really engaged readers of this lovely book, No Thanks, which I am the author of. I'm Keturah Kendrick, and today I'm joined by a phenomenal, a phenomenal young woman. Tameshia, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are. Tell us about all the places you've traveled to and you've lived. Say hello, Tamisha.
Hey everyone, so I'm Tameshia or just Misha is fine. I actually met Keturah when I was living in Ghana after living in Rwanda, and we connected through mutual friends that had lived in both places. So 7 years ago, I decided to move to Rwanda to study abroad originally and to intern at the First Lady's office, and just kind of really get a good understanding of. At the time, I wanted to be a diplomat. Um, and the goal of moving to Rwanda was to better understand what happens when nations go through conflict and how they transform after, and just really just digging into that, how societies change and what we can do to prevent them. And so what I discovered during that time was that what I would be forced to push as a diplomat and what I felt in my spirit were actually very incongruous. And so that led me on a path of, and incongruous, because I don't explain this a lot, but just kind of incongruous in having to push this notion of truth and reconciliation and in terms of genocide when the US hasn't done the same, specifically as it relates to the African diaspora and more specifically African American. Um, so that led me to kind of search, and I think, like as Keturah mentioned in the first chapter, in chapter 7 of the book, of where there, I forgot how to say, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah, wherever you go, wherever you say it again.
Wherever you go,
Okay.
there you are. It's like a little
Yeah.
tongue.
So yeah, wherever you there you go. So I just had these questions that came to mind to me, like, am I getting too comfortable here? Is this life really for me? And that led me to actually continue on in education and to pursue a degree in international communication, and moved to Ghana for a fellowship. And then at the same time, I joined the founding team of a startup and eventually dropped out of grad school to focus on that for 2.5 years, then launched my own companies. And that leads me to today, where now I'm a designer instead of a diplomat, and I'm focused on preserving traditional African craftsmanship techniques, not just Africa, but African diaspora, through producing contemporary fashion and home decor.
Oh, wonderful. Just
Yep.
such a very full experience. And it's interesting. I wanted to talk to you about the book, especially
Mm-hmm.
because there was so much in it that I just felt you would connect to. And you mentioned it a little bit before. The things that you have done,
Mm-hmm.
because you said I was in Rwanda as part of a study abroad program, and I thought I had this path. And then I realized the path I thought I wanted, when I was on it, I was like, nah, no, thank you. And I a different path. And when we've talked before about the book, you mentioned that a lot of things resonated with you. You are younger than I am. Do you mind if I ask how old you are?
I'm 32.
Oh, you're 32. So you're in your
Magic year.
the sweet decade, the sweet
Yes.
decade of the 30s. So you're 32, so you're about 12 years younger than me. So you aren't exactly the target group I wrote this for. I wrote this really for young girls who are in college and they're trying to figure out if what they're supposed to want, because they don't want it if they're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You chose the path least taken, and then when you were on that path, even though it's the one least taken, you were like, even this one doesn't work for me.
Yes.
So I'm curious about any part of particularly the essays or the chapters that we're talking about living abroad,
Mm-hmm.
because I enjoyed my life in the US. I was very comfortable in New York City. I had a great friendship network, but I moved simply because I felt like there was something more. I couldn't name it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I did feel like I was too comfortable, and there was a world and something I wanted to explore. And you've talked about reading that part of the book and thinking, I kind of connect with that. So when it comes to that specific theme of this idea of leaving the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
because although you don't hate it, it's a problematic country. You don't hate it. You have a good life. You want to go elsewhere. What resonated with you, particularly for those particular chapters where I explored that idea and shared my version of that?
Mhm. I think what resonated the most was, I mean, there's a lot. Like, I could have wrote this myself in a few years, but in particular, the last sentence of chapter 6, which I think is page 130,
Mm.
when you say, living outside of American borders has given me more of myself, which has made me even better equipped for this continued work of self-salvation. So I think why that resonated so much is because a lot of people look at my decision to move abroad as like something super, like, one, it's because Africa, it's automatically it's missionary work and I'm saving
Oh my
people. And I'm
goodness.
like, absolutely not. Like, if anything, I've learned, only person I'm saving is myself. So I think you calling it self-salvation just put into words something I haven't been able to describe to people in
Mm.
a very long time. And I tell people I just learned more about myself, and I learned, just how American I am, and specifically how African American I am. In particular, very Black American from Texas. Like, that's what I've learned in, my travels and life across 14 African nations,
Mm-hmm.
is that I just met more of myself.
Mm.
And just able, I think there's not like, I can't, this is something I say a lot that I'm like, kind of, I don't know how to explain to people if they've never had the experience, but I tell people, like, you're really just trading one system of oppression for another. And in the
Mm.
States,
Yep.
that is racism. And in Africa, that's classism. And by virtue of, I guess I get to exercise an American privilege that I didn't necessarily ask for when I'm abroad, and specifically in Africa, like a blue passport. So when you talk about like how your passport granted you these opportunities, like, that's literally how I've been able to do what I've been able to do. Not that I'm not smart or any of these other things, but I realize that I have that privilege, and that's something that um, I think a lot of people aren't willing to talk about a lot.
I'm so glad, and it's one of the reasons why I've always instantly liked you,
Mm,
because there are so many American expats, and sadly enough, Black American expats in Africa who won't acknowledge the fact that we have an unearned privilege that
mhm,
in some ways, and I've said this before, and Black American expats were pushed back
mhm.
against. In some ways, it's made us a bit of colonizers as well,
Yep.
because of all the things our blue passport and our American privilege can
Right.
allow us to skip over. So,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think one of the reasons why I wrote that specific line that you quoted about it, I haven't, I don't feel like living overseas in Africa and even in China has transformed me. I feel like it's giving me more of myself, because you start to really learn who
Hmm.
you really are as opposed
Right.
to who you promote yourself
Yep.
as. And yeah, the classism in the hierarchy within local continental Africans, and then when you look at all of the foreigners
Hmm.
who are in these, really big famous cities like Accra and Lagos and Kampala. Yeah, we don't talk about that. How
Yep.
you trade off the racism, and then you, in some ways, become the oppressor of people who you want to accept you in a way
Hmm.
that they can't, because you are basically pimp strolling in their country.
Yep.
Not even bothering to learn Shwi or Kinyarwanda, getting
Hmm.
jobs that their cousin who has gone to the local university and speaks
Right.
three languages can't get. So yeah, I'm glad that you will acknowledge that, because a lot of us won't.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's even more interesting because I do know enough Kinyarwanda and Tree and Ga and literally probably a good 10 African languages to actually get around and places that I've traveled, lived, that I revisit a lot. Um, so even with that, and in the case of Ghana specifically, there's the whole right to vote, and just I guess like this romanticization. English sometimes sucks for me right now.
All this English.
Romanticization of the continent in this way, of the motherland, and not wanting to. People ask me for my experience, so that's why I think I really resonated with this part of you. Because people, and going back to this chapter where you're talking about dating, in particular, like women reach out to me like, hey, this dating thing is not working for me in the States. I'm gonna move to Ghana. Like, how do I get citizenship? And like, where's my king, right? And I'm just like,
girl,
I can't. I can only share with you my experience of dating and being here, and like how the right to vote really works or doesn't work. So I think you just really put into words some things that I don't I haven't developed the language for yet, by not wanting to ruin people's dreams. 'Cause I feel like I'm like telling people Santa Claus isn't real. Like I want them to go visit, but I also want to be very real and add nuance to the experience, and it's not something a lot of people are ready for. So I appreciate the way that you worded everything, and I think as a younger woman. I think if I had this book because I moved to Africa when I was 24, so um, I think if I had this then, I would have some of my initial landings would have been a little bit different. Like I didn't go like, hey, I'm connecting to my roots or anything like that at all. Like I didn't have that notion, mostly because it was Rwanda, not Ghana, like West Africa. I
it
think
wasn't West Africa exactly, right?
too. But Rwanda was more of like I'm the only Black person in the study abroad program, and like, you know, my classmates, this is their first time being a minority, so to speak. And so they're grappling with like what it is to be othered. And I'm like, people are literally looking at me like, why don't you speak the language? And, this is before everybody was cool with being from Wakanda. So I think knowing that, because I felt super crazy then, like in my initial decision, like my own mom tried to convince me and like buy me out of that experience. And I'm just glad that I had the wherewithal and like sure-footedness to know to go. But I can't imagine like how it would have been to actually like have this book to look at then and know that like there is someone else that has lived this unconventional path. So
well, yeah, that makes me extremely, extremely gratified because, as I say in the preface, I felt crazy quite often in my youth. For many reasons, as I cover in the book, and the one that has come up the most at my events and when I've had talks like this with readers is not wanting to have children and not wanting to be married, which is a huge one. But exactly, so especially on the continent, like
right,
yeah,
like you're a small girl. Yeah,
yeah, especially dating on the continent, wanting to be married and not wanting to mother, which is a huge no thanks to, which is why I think women who have felt that way and women who don't have clung to that the most. But I wanted to also just sort of talk a little bit about this non-traditional path too, and I'm glad that you saw this sense of, if I had had it even when I was 24 and my mom was saying, why are you going to Africa? And I remember when I went, the Ebola thing had popped up.
And that's when I was moving to Ghana, exact time.
Exactly. And there was lots of, oh my goodness, you gonna die from Ebola.
Right.
Just like, calm down. So I can imagine your mother, who only had your best interest in mind, trying to convince you that you didn't know what was best for you.
Right. Still. Still, 8 years later.
Shockingly, mamas kind of do that for most of your life, unfortunately, as you probably have prepared yourself for.
Yeah.
So, but thank you for saying that. So I'm glad that it resonated the way it was supposed to, even though there are some choices I have made that you won't necessarily make, but this particular one I'm glad to hear that. Are there any final thoughts takeaways you want to share about the book, or clarifications, questions you have for me about?
Yes, I wanted to know. Okay, just going back to that last sentence of chapter 6 again, when you say, I want to know, like, what ways are you even better equipped for the continued work of self-salvation?
That's a really good question, Nisha. I feel like I'm better equipped for self-salvation because I moved to another country alone as a
Mm-hmm.
single woman, and I was 39. I was 39 when I moved to Rwanda, and when I returned from living overseas here in the States, I am now 44. I returned a few weeks ago, and aside from, especially living on the continent and having
Mm-hmm.
to constantly defend in some direct and indirect ways who I was. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I am a woman of a certain age who is not fretting being unmarried. I am certain I won't be having children. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't believe Jesus is going to save me, which is
Right. Right, all those things.
which is another huge thing,
Yeah.
especially on the continent. So in so many ways, I had to defend who I was. And
Mm-hmm.
even in China, which is more secular, and one would think there would be less pressures on women to sort of uphold these traditional, good Christian, good godly
Mm-hmm.
women values, I still had to sort of explain myself and defend myself a lot. And in that explanation, in that defense of myself, I started to own who I really was. Like, I didn't really realize I didn't desire marriage until I was in Africa. And
Mm-hmm.
as you well know, as an attractive Black woman with an American passport, I could have been married easily.
Yep.
On the
50 times now.
and not a 90-day fiance type of a deal, like a marriage to a real middle class dude who was looking to level up and who wanted to
Mm-hmm.
quote unquote build. So it being in Rwanda and then traveling around um, to the other countries on the continent and having that option more than available to me in some real ways made me just own, you know something? You've been lying to a lot of people and yourself all this time. You've been saying I'm waiting on the right man, when the reality is you left the right man in the US to come to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you left the man at, eating brochettes at car wash in Rwanda. You
Car wash. Memories.
so you just don't want this. And
Mm-hmm.
it made me, I think, when you are in a culture that in so many ways upholds and pushes this whole one narrative of one way to be a woman, or one way to be an
Right.
adult. There's only one path to adulthood. And you constantly have to confront that. It makes you realize who you really are, and it gives you the strength and the courage to just own it.
Right.
And that's one of the things I owned. And I started to see examples of why I didn't want certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And having to question sometimes, I can see why this other narrative is so popular. It
Mm-hmm.
makes perfect sense. And having to be honest with myself about the pros and cons of
Mm-hmm.
my choice. So it made me, it's prepared me to really just own who I am and to stand behind my choices without flinching,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that makes it easier when I am now among, because in New York City, my story being child free by choice, not believing in Jesus, not want to be married, you can pitch a rock anywhere in Brooklyn and hit about four of
Right.
me. So now that I'm amongst people who
Mm-hmm.
are not as far from my perspective as I was abroad, I've had to own other aspects of my identity and question what we all believe is this cool way of being as well. So I think it's just having to defend and being thought of, having to defend yourself and being thought of as the crazy American lady, um,
Mm-hmm.
really prepares you to just Just like when it was that song, Balls to the Wall, just go all out. Just go all out with the extra.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for giving me your time. I know you got a lot going on. You got about 1,000 businesses. You're moving. You're trying to enjoy the rest of your hot girl summer. So
It's mediocre girl summer right now.
I kind of feel like everybody who's
mild.
like, is anyone really having a hot girl summer? I don't feel
I'm
like
not trying to.
exactly.
Like spreadsheet summer.
Yes, but thank you so much, and I appreciate your perspective. Just very thoughtful, and I'm glad that you felt connected to the book.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for writing the book.
Oh, you're welcome. So, no thanks, Black female and living in the Martyr-Free Zone. Get you a copy. You will not regret it.